All right, we've heard President Obama's definition of leadership. He told us it's climate change. We heard Obama put climate change on a pedestal during his State of the Union address this past January. But I don't think he's really worried about how we treat the environment because of the Westlake Landfill. This landfill, the Westlake Landfill, is located in Bridgeton, Missouri, and it's a product of the Manhattan Project. Nuclear waste from when we created the first nuclear bomb in World War II was illegally dumped into the Westlake Landfill in 1973. Once it was discovered what had happened, government handled it terribly, no surprise. Nobody could decide whether the situation should be an EPA Superfund, which is the federal government's program for cleaning up contaminated land, or whether it should be turned over to the Department of Energy and use the Army's cleanup program. Ultimately, it went to the EPA Superfund for cleanup in 1990, a quarter of a century ago. Residents of this area have been waiting 25 years for this cleanup. All the while, the president talks a big game about climate change and our environment. Inconsistent, right? Joining me today to discuss is president of the Market Institute, Charlie Sauer. Charlie, hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
All right, help me break this down for myself and for viewers. Basically, Bridgeton residents have been waiting for 25 years, Charlie, for the government to clean this up. What has the government actually done?
So, yeah, I mean, you, I think, laid it out perfectly right. In 1990, the government finally designated Westlake Landfill as a Superfund site. And the dumping happened in the 1970s from the 1940s Manhattan Project. So this has been going on for a long time, even before we got to 1990. But since 1990, they've been identifying the parties of interest. They've been doing studies. The Missouri environmental agencies have been doing studies. And all of those studies have come back that the landfill doesn't propose or will not be harmful to the community around it. And just this last year, the EPA finally came up with a proposal to solve the problem, and that involved doing some cleanup and creating an isolation barrier. And they had the private companies that were going to pay for it as they did the cleanup. And so, after 25 years, which is an amazingly long time, the Superfund project, the Superfunds always go through this long project. It's part of bureaucracy at its worst. This is government boondoggle at its worst. But after that 25 years, a couple of senators and a couple of representatives are actually proposing to hit the reset button and move it back 25 years. And so that process has to start over. It's amazing to watch, and I wouldn't believe it if I wasn't seeing it.
Right, it's like you said, it's bureaucracy at its worst. What a nightmare. Now, I want to go back to something you said, because it is a little hard for me to believe that all this nuclear waste, the CDC says there's no risk to this, no groundwater, air, soil contamination. Charlie, is that true?
Yeah, so I mean, the EPA studies have said this, and I can tell you what, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to tell you that what the EPA studies are true or false. What I can say is that all of the studies to this point by the government have said that it's safe. And now what Senator McCaskill and Representative Ann Wagner over in the House are proposing is they're saying that, we just need to hand it over to the Army Corps of Engineers. And one of their claims is that these studies are wrong. But before you hit the reset button 25 years, before you go back through this process, and the process that they want to go through spends $400 million of the taxpayers' money, before they do that, I think we should at least have a debate over whether the science is right or for whether the studies were good. And I mean, I think that it goes to your question. I can't answer it. I'm an economist, so I look at the numbers that these senators want to spend. They want to spend $400 million. It's just like the senators spending an earmark. When I was on Capitol Hill, we used to earmark to the Army Corps of Engineers, and that's exactly what this looks like. And, I think that that's what we're looking at is an earmark, but they could be upset about the science. Either way, it should be a debate on Capitol Hill, and we should actually go through regular order before we hit a 25-year reset button.
Right, and maybe have some objective people, some people from the private industry do studies so that there's no conflict of interest. Now